A millionaire gets trapped in his car after an accident on a deserted road as the vehicle begins to catch fire. An 8-year-old poor girl witnesses the desperate scene and finds his phone lying on the ground. In panic, she screams, "Help! I think the car is going to explode," and dials the last called number. But when a voice answers on the other end, the response she gets makes the situation far more dangerous than she ever imagined. The air inside the luxury sedan was cold, artificial, a bubble of control amid the suffocating heat that shimmered off the asphalt of the deserted highway. Arthur Sterling tightened his grip on the leather steering wheel, the tension from the meeting still vibrating through his veins like a slow-acting poison. Incompetence. It was the only word echoing in his mind. Incompetence, and worse, a disloyalty he could feel in the air, as thick and sticky as the sweltering Thursday afternoon heat. Someone close, someone in whom he had placed an almost unconditional trust, was systematically dismantling his empire, piece by piece. The financial reports didn't lie. They were small acts of sabotage, subtle, almost invisible, but their sum represented a hemorrhage that threatened everything he had built with relentless dedication. He had looked into the eyes of every director, searching for a flicker of guilt, but found only fear or flattery. Only Richard, his partner and friend of decades, seemed to share his outrage, his brow furrowed in genuine concern. Even so, a nagging seed of doubt refused to be ignored. Impatient, Arthur floored the accelerator, the powerful engine responding with a low, satisfied growl. He needed distance, speed, anything to make him feel in command again. The road stretched before him, a lonely grey ribbon cutting through the dry, dusty landscape. There were no other souls, no other vehicles in sight. It was just him, his car, and the ghosts of betrayal that haunted him. The empty mansion awaited him at the end of that road, a silent monument to his success and his solitude. He allowed himself a sigh, a rare concession to the vulnerability he kept locked beneath layers of arrogance and control. For an instant, the powerful Arthur Sterling felt small. A boy lost in a game where the rules had changed without him noticing. A sharp curve was approaching. Instinctively, his foot sought the brake pedal, pressing it with the familiarity of a gesture repeated thousands of times. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The pedal sank to the floor without any resistance, a mushy, useless sensation. Panic, an emotion he despised and rarely felt, rose in his throat like bile. He pumped the pedal once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The car, instead of slowing, seemed to gain speed, devouring the asphalt toward the treacherous curve. The facade of absolute control shattered. The subtle scent of burning rubber began to invade the cabin, and a sharp, sickly metallic sound came from somewhere beneath the chassis. The realization hit him with the force of a punch. This wasn't a malfunction. It was a trap. The meeting, the suspicion, the sabotage. It all connected in a terrifying flash. The world became a blur of brown and green as he lost control. The car skidded, the front tire blowing out with a bang that tore through the afternoon silence. The sound of twisting metal and shattering glass was the last symphony his ears registered before the vehicle flipped with brutal violence. The roof caved in, the world spinning in a kaleidoscope of pain and confusion. For a second, there was a profound silence, broken only by the ticking of hot parts cooling. Hanging upside down, pinned by the seatbelt that dug into his chest, Arthur tasted blood in his mouth. His vision darkened at the edges, but before unconsciousness could take him, he saw it. A small flame, orange and sinister, dancing near the crumpled engine, a flame that was growing, fed by leaking fuel, promising to consume everything. The fine dust of the dirt road clung to her sweaty skin, and the midday sun felt like a hot anvil on her head. Lena, 8 years old with perpetually scraped knees, stopped chasing a yellow butterfly when the distant sound reached her. It wasn't a loud noise, but a dry crack, followed by a grinding of metal that sounded wrong, sick, even for someone used to the sounds of the old cars that occasionally ventured down this way. She lifted her small, attentive eyes toward the main road, the one they called the asphalt road. A column of thick, black smoke began to rise into the blue sky. A dark and ominous stain. Her grandma always said, "Where there's smoke, there's fire," and Lena's heart, a brave little drum, began to beat faster. She didn't think. She acted. With the agility of someone who knew every rock and thorny bush of this terrain, she started running toward the danger. Her worn-out sandals barely protected her from the hot, uneven ground. Her breath came in short gasps, and the taste of dust filled her mouth. The community where she lived, a handful of simple, hardy homes, was left behind. She was the only one out here, a tiny figure running against a vast, indifferent landscape. The smoke grew thicker as she approached, and the acrid smell of rubber and something else, something chemical and sweet, burned her nostrils. Fear began to set in, a cold feeling in her hot stomach, but the image of someone needing help was stronger. Grandma also said the worst thing in the world was to see suffering and look the other way, and Lena never looked the other way. When she finally reached the edge of the asphalt road, the scene made her freeze for an instant. The car, or what was left of it, was a sculpture of twisted metal upside down, crushed against the ground. Orange flames licked at the front end, growing with a terrifying hunger. The heat was intense, forcing her to take a step back. Her eyes scanned the wreckage, and that's when she saw him. A man hanging by his seatbelt, his face covered in soot and blood, motionless. Was he? No, she couldn't think that. He needed help, immediately. She looked around, at the empty road stretching in both directions. No one. They were alone. Panic threatened to choke her, but she pushed it down. That's when something glinted in the harsh sun, a few feet from the wreckage. A small black rectangle, smooth and strangely intact. A cell phone. She'd seen one in the hands of the few visitors who came to her community. It was a tool for talking to people far away. Running to the device, she picked it up. The screen was cracked but lit. Her small, trembling fingers slid across the surface. She didn't know how to dial 911, didn't know the number. But there was a green button on the screen with the word "redial" next to a name, Richard. It was her only chance. With her heart in her throat, she pressed the icon. The phone rang once, twice. On the other end, a man's voice answered, surprisingly calm. "Arthur, did something happen?" the voice asked. Lena couldn't speak. A sob caught in her throat. The voice continued, now with a different tone, softer, almost fatherly. "Hello, is someone there?" Lena finally managed a sound, a frightened whisper. "Help! The car! Fire!" A brief silence followed, and then the voice replied, with a tranquility that chilled the little girl's spine without her understanding why. "Where are you, sweetie? You just stay right where you are. Help is on its way." The man's words on the phone hung in the heavy, smoky air, a strange balm of calm in the midst of chaos. You just stay right where you are. To an 8-year-old girl, taught to respect and obey her elders, it should have been a relief, a simple order to follow. But Lena's instinct, honed by the need to read the world around her to survive, screamed that something was wrong. The voice held no panic, no urgency. There was a controlled coldness, a stillness that didn't match the image of a burning car and an injured man. It wasn't the sound of someone sending help. It was the sound of someone ensuring a chess piece stayed on its square. She looked from the phone in her hand to the flames that now danced with a hungry ferocity, licking at the car's twisted metal. The heat was a slap to the face. A low, guttural moan came from inside the vehicle. The man was alive. The decision was made in the blink of an eye, a silent rebellion against an order her soul knew was a lie. Staying there meant watching this man be consumed by fire. It meant carrying that image for the rest of her days. She couldn't. Her grandma would say that inaction is the accomplice of evil. Lena dropped the phone into the roadside dust. Her eyes, small and determined, scanned the roadside for a tool, for anything, and then she saw it, a sharp-edged rock with a promising weight to it. It was big for her small hands, but necessity gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. With an effort that made her arms tremble, she lifted it. Staggering under the weight, she approached the car. The heat was an invisible monster trying to push her back. The smell of burning plastic and gasoline was suffocating. She could see the man's face now, his eyes half open in a haze of pain and confusion. He was trapped by the seatbelt. The thick, dark strap stretched across his chest like a steel bar. The metal buckle crushed and jammed in the crash. She tried to press the red release button, but her small fingers lacked the strength to move the damaged mechanism. The flames roared louder, a warning. Time was running out. Taking a deep breath of the toxic air, Lena raised the rock above her head. The motion was clumsy, driven more by courage than technique. She aimed for the buckle and brought it down. The impact was a dull thud that vibrated up her arms. The plastic casing of the buckle cracked but didn't give. The man groaned again, a sound that spurred her on. She would not fail, not with a life in her hands. Ignoring the blistering heat that was beginning to form on her exposed skin, she raised the rock once more. This time she put all her weight, all her fear, and all her determination into the blow. A sharp crack, like a breaking bone, echoed above the roar of the fire. The mechanism shattered. The seatbelt strap went slack instantly, releasing the man, who slumped lifelessly over the wreckage of the dashboard. Fleeting relief washed over her, but it was immediately replaced by a new panic. He was free, but he was still inside an oven about to explode. She scrambled through the broken window, ignoring the shards of glass that scratched her arms, and grabbed his shirt collar. She pulled with all her might, her feet slipping in the dust. He was a dead weight, impossibly heavy. The fire, as if offended by her interference, surged forward with fury, engulfing what was left of the hood. That's when she heard another sound, different from the fire. The sound of tires on asphalt approaching fast. Looking up, she saw a dark car coming down the highway, still distant, but slowing down. Was this the help the man had promised, or the source of that terrifying calm she'd heard on the phone? Arthur floated in a murky ocean of pain, where sounds were distorted and light hurt his eyes. Consciousness returned in sharp, confusing fragments. He remembered the smell of rubber, the icy panic of the failed brakes. The world turning upside down. Now, the dominant smell was different, antiseptic and sterile, and the soft, rhythmic sound was an electronic beep. He forced his eyelids open. The bland, white ceiling of a hospital room came into focus. An IV was taped to his arm, and a throbbing pain radiated from his ribs and head with every breath. He was alive. The realization should have brought relief, but it only brought a flood of urgent questions. How? The last image in his mind was of orange flames crawling toward him, a promise of annihilation. A nurse entered the room, his friendly face lighting up when he saw him awake. "Mr. Sterling, good to have you back with us. You gave us quite a scare." Arthur tried to speak, but his throat was as dry as sandpaper. The nurse offered him a cup of water with a straw. "Easy does it," he advised. After a few sips, Arthur managed a question. What happened?" The nurse smiled. "You're lucky, very lucky. A little girl found you. She managed to pull you from the car moments before it exploded. The firefighters said it was a miracle. One brave kid, that's what everyone's saying." A girl. The image was hazy, almost a dream. A small face, smudged with soot, huge and determined eyes, an impossible strength pulling him away from the hellish heat. It hadn't been a delusion. In the days that followed, as his body began to heal under the care of the best medical team his money could buy, the details of his rescue emerged. The police interviewed him, and he told them about the sabotaged brakes. They listened with professional skepticism, taking notes, but their expressions suggested that a stressed-out millionaire could easily mistake an accident for a conspiracy. It was when he asked about the girl, his savior, that the story took a disconcerting turn. "Ah, yes, Lena," the detective said, flipping through his notes. "A girl from the community nearby, lives with her grandmother. She told us an interesting story." The detective's tone was patronizing. "She said she used your phone, called the last number, and that a man answered strangely, telling her to wait at the scene." Arthur felt a chill. "And did you trace the call?" The detective shrugged. "There was no call log on your device, Mr. Sterling. It was damaged by the heat, and the girl, well, she has a vivid imagination. Kids from that area make up all sorts of stories for attention. She's probably just after a reward." Anger rose in Arthur's throat, hot and bitter. Ingratitude, ignorance. A child had saved his life, a life worth billions, and she was being dismissed as a liar looking for a handout. The gratitude he felt mingled with a growing horror. The girl had not only saved him, but she was also the only other witness to that moment, the only one who had heard the voice on the other end of the line, the calm, controlled voice that belonged to his predator. If they were dismissing her story, it left her vulnerable, exposed. He, Arthur Sterling, the man who controlled empires, owed his life to a child the system considered insignificant and invisible. And he realized, with a clarity that frightened him, that the battle for his survival hadn't ended on the highway. In fact, it was just beginning, and now he wasn't just fighting for himself. He had to protect that girl. He had a debt that no amount of money could repay. But as he recovered in that sterile room, the first installment would be ensuring she was believed, and to do that, he had to find her, hear the story from her own lips, and then make the whole world listen. As soon as he was discharged, against his doctor's advice for prolonged rest, Arthur's first order of business was to find Lena. It wasn't difficult. His personal assistant, an efficient and discreet young man named Daniel, located the community in under an hour. It was a cluster of humble homes, built with reclaimed materials and a great deal of resilience, nestled in a fold of land forgotten by progress. As he stepped out of his replacement car, a sober model that still looked like a spaceship in this setting, Arthur felt the curious and distrustful stares of the residents. He was a stranger, an intruder from the world of asphalt and money. Lena's house was one of the smallest, but also one of the most cared for. A small garden of stubborn herbs grew in old cans near the door, and a lace curtain, yellowed with age, hung in the single window. A woman with white hair and skin weathered by the sun met him at the door. Her eyes, the same intense brown as Lena's, sized him up with a wisdom that couldn't be bought. It was Eleanor, the grandmother. Arthur, used to commanding boardrooms with his presence, felt strangely intimidated. He explained who he was, his voice softer than usual, and expressed his infinite gratitude. The old woman just nodded, gesturing for him to come inside. Lena was sitting at a small wooden table, drawing on a scrap of a paper bag with a stub of a pencil. When she saw him, her eyes widened, and she shrank back a little, as if expecting to be scolded. Arthur's heart tightened. He knelt to get down to her level, ignoring the twinge of pain in his ribs. "Lena," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I came to thank you. You saved my life." The girl relaxed a little, a shy smile appearing on her lips. It was there, in the small, clean room, that he realized the depth of the poverty they lived in. Food was scarce, the furniture old and patched, and the grandmother, he noticed, breathed with a faint wheeze, a sign of frail health. Arthur's gratitude quickly morphed into a plan of action. He wanted to give them everything: a new house, medical care, a life without worry. But when he started to speak of it, he saw a shadow of suspicion in Eleanor's eyes. It was the wariness of someone who had been given many empty promises. He understood. He had to go slow, build trust. And above all, he needed to validate Lena's story. He asked her to tell him again about the phone call, The girl recounted the event with the clarity and simplicity of truth, describing the disturbing calm in the voice. "He didn't sound like he wanted to help," she concluded, with a wisdom beyond her 8 years. In the following days, Lena and her grandmother's life began to change, but not in the way Arthur had planned. Instead of a new house, what arrived first was intimidation. One day, as she walked back from the small community school, a sleek car that didn't belong in the neighborhood pulled up beside her. A man in a suit smiled at her from the window. "You're the little hero, aren't you? What exactly did you see at that accident?" The question was casual, but his eyes were cold. Lena, frightened, just ran home. On another occasion, an expensive basket of fruit and sweets appeared on their doorstep. With no sender, just a printed note, "Smart children know when to be quiet." The poison was in the sweetness. Arthur, upon learning this, felt his blood run cold. They had found her. The faceless enemy knew who she was, knew where she lived. He was testing the waters, measuring the threat this child posed. The war he thought would be fought in boardrooms and courtrooms was being waged in the dusty yard of an 8-year-old girl. And the fear he felt wasn't for his company or his money, but for this small, brave life he now felt compelled to protect at any cost. The game had been elevated. Arthur's unease morphed into a cold, calculated paranoia. The intimidation attempts against Lena were proof that he wasn't just fighting a business saboteur. He was dealing with someone willing to terrorize a child to cover their tracks. He could no longer treat this as a simple corporate matter. He discreetly hired the best private security team money could buy. They weren't men in suits with conspicuous earpieces, but surveillance experts capable of blending into the environment, watching Lena's community from a distance, ensuring no strange car or unfamiliar face approached her again without being noticed. He explained to Eleanor that they were friends, making sure the press didn't bother them. A partial lie, the old woman accepted with a look that said she knew there was more, but she trusted the man her granddaughter had saved. In parallel, Arthur channeled his rage and impatience into the investigation. He no longer trusted the police, whose efforts seemed slow and skeptical. He used his own resources to hire an independent forensic team, the best engineers and experts in the country. They collected the charred wreckage of his car from the police impound lot and took it to a private shoe high-tech lab. Arthur wanted answers, not assumptions. He wanted irrefutable proof that he hadn't been a victim of chance. He wanted the murder weapon, even if that weapon was a surgically precise cut to a brake line. While the technical investigation proceeded, he dedicated himself to understanding his own world. He spent days and nights locked in his office, reviewing every contract, every email, every transaction from the past few years. The betrayal had to have left a trail, however small. He analyzed the behavior of his directors, his assistants, his partners. Distrust was an acid-corroding lifelong relationships. Every smile, every word of support now seemed suspect. The most painful part was looking at Richard, his partner, his friend since college, the man with whom he'd built the empire from scratch. Richard was always by his side, offering support, condemning the accident with a vehemence that seemed genuine. "Who would do something like this, Arthur? It's monstrous," he would say, his eyes full of a concern that now seemed rehearsed. Richard's proximity was what tortured him the most. He had access to everything: Arthur's schedule, the maintenance details of his cars, his most secret plans. The opportunity was glaring, but the motive, why? Envy, greed. It seemed unthinkable. Richard had everything he could possibly want. Arthur fought against his own intuition, the little voice in his head that screamed his friend's name, because accepting that truth would be more devastating than any financial loss. It would be the bankruptcy of his ability to judge human character, the annihilation of the only true friendship he thought he had. The turning point came on a rainy night, nearly 2 weeks after the crash. Daniel, his assistant, entered his office with a tablet in hand, his face pale. Mr. Sterling, the preliminary results from the forensic analysis are in. Arthur took the device, his hands steady despite the tremor inside him. The words jumped off the screen, technical and cold, but their meaning was crystal clear. Deliberate severing of the brake fluid line, use of high-precision tool, consistent with professional sabotage. There it was, the proof. The confirmation that his life had been the target of an elimination attempt, the complete validation of Lena's testimony. He felt a mixture of vindication and terror. Suspicion had solidified into certainty, but the confirmation brought a new, terrible implication. If the sabotage was professional, the saboteur was no amateur. It was someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and someone who, having failed once, would certainly not hesitate to try again, using even more lethal methods to silence not only him, but also the only witness who had heard him on the other end of the line. The confirmation of sabotage changed the entire game. Arthur was no longer a paranoid businessman. He was the proven victim of a conspiracy. With the forensic report in hand, he felt a surge of power and clarity. The police's skepticism would vanish like fog in the morning sun. He could finally force a serious investigation, shine a spotlight on those in his inner circle, and expose the traitor. However, a greater concern consumed him: Lena's safety. The enemy, now aware that the investigation would become official and relentless, would grow more desperate. And desperate people do unthinkable things. He needed to get Lena and her grandmother out of that vulnerable community, to place them somewhere safe where his men could properly protect them. The next morning, he drove to their house, the official report resting in a briefcase on the passenger seat. The sun was shining, but a sense of foreboding accompanied him. When he arrived, he found the door to the small house open and a distraught neighbor waiting for him in the yard. "Mr. Sterling, thank goodness you're here," the woman said, wringing a dish towel in her hands. "It's Eleanor. She took a bad turn during the night. The community doctor came, but she's not getting any better." A knot of ice formed in Arthur's stomach. He rushed inside. Eleanor was lying in her bed, her skin pale and clammy with sweat, her breathing shallow and labored. Lena was beside her, holding her grandmother's wrinkled hand, her large eyes filled with a fear no child should ever know. Arthur acted with the speed that characterized him in business crises. In less than half an hour, a private ambulance was there, transporting Eleanor to the best hospital in the city, to the private wing he had reserved with a single phone call. Lena went with them, refusing to let go of her grandmother's hand. At the hospital, a team of specialists awaited her. Arthur sat in the waiting room, the briefcase with the forensic report forgotten in his lap, his investigative victory now seeming insignificant in the face of human fragility. He watched Lena through the glass, a tiny, resilient figure sitting beside the hospital bed, whispering words of comfort to her sleeping grandmother. The hours dragged on. Tests were run, blood samples were collected, specialists consulted. The cause of Eleanor's sudden illness was a mystery. Her symptoms were vague and contradictory: extreme weakness, nausea, mental confusion. They didn't fit any obvious diagnosis. Arthur, impatient and accustomed to getting answers, pressed the doctors, who only advised calm. It was late afternoon when a toxicologist, an older man with tired, perceptive eyes, called him aside for a private conversation. "Mr. Sterling?" the doctor began, his voice low and grave. "Mrs. Eleanor's symptoms are peculiar. They are consistent with prolonged exposure to certain toxins, specifically compounds that can be found in some types of pesticides or slow-acting poisons." Arthur stared at him, his mind trying to process the information. "Poisons?" he repeated, the words sounding absurd. "But how? She barely leaves the house." The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Exactly. Which leads us to believe the source of exposure must be something she ingests regularly, something in her home." Water, food, perhaps even her heart medication. The truth hit him with the force of a runaway train, knocking the wind out of him. It wasn't a coincidence. The grandmother's sudden illness, right after the intimidation attempts on Lena, could not be chance. It was an attack, a cowardly, silent, and nearly perfect attack, disguised as an ailment of old age. The enemy wasn't just testing the waters, he had escalated the aggression in a terrifying way. He was no longer just trying to scare Lena into silence. He was trying to remove her only guardian, her only pillar of support, leaving the girl alone, helpless, and consequently, easier to control or silence. The report in his briefcase suddenly felt like it was burning in his hands. The war was no longer about cars and business. It was about the lives of an innocent family, and he had unwittingly put them in the line of fire. The toxicologist's diagnosis turned Arthur's fear into a cold, precise fury. The cruelty of the method, slowly poisoning a sick old woman to terrorize her granddaughter, revealed a level of depravity he could barely comprehend. It was a sick chess move, removing the queen to leave the pawn exposed. He immediately ordered his security team to seal off Lena's house, treating it like a crime scene. Nothing was to be touched until his own experts, the best in the country, arrived to analyze every grain of sugar, every tea leaf, every drop of water. He trusted no one else. While Lena's grandmother was treated with the best antidotes and intensive care his money could provide, Arthur became the wall between that family and the monster hunting them. He installed Lena in a luxury hotel suite, an environment as alien to her as the planet Mars. The girl, despite the luxury surrounding her, was quiet and withdrawn, the worry for her grandmother weighing on her small shoulders. Arthur found himself in a role for which he had no training: caregiver. He tried to distract her with expensive toys, giant televisions, and foods she had never seen. But nothing seemed to reach the depth of her anguish. It was only when he sat on the floor with her, with a pad of paper and some colored pencils, that she began to open up. He was no good at drawing. His attempts at a dog looking more like a misshapen cloud, and it made her laugh. A small, fragile, but genuine laugh. In that moment, on the cold marble floor of an impersonal hotel, an unlikely connection began to form. He was no longer just the rich man or the crash victim. He was Arthur, the man who drew funny dogs, and she was Lena, the girl who, even with her world collapsing, could still find a moment of joy. The investigation into his business circle, however, was a dark counterpoint to these moments of tenderness. The confirmation of sabotage and the attack on Lena's grandmother eliminated any doubt about the traitor's identity. It could only be someone with intimate knowledge of his life and, at the same time, the cruelty to carry out such acts. Richard's name echoed in his mind, a painful, dissonant note. He began to investigate his partner in secret, using a team of former intelligence agents who operated in the shadows. He had them dig into Richard's finances, his communications, his movements in the weeks leading up to the crash. Every day without concrete proof was an agony, an internal battle between loyalty to a decades-long friendship and the cold logic of the facts. The betrayal, when it was confirmed, didn't come as an explosion, but as a quiet report delivered in a manila envelope. The investigators had discovered a series of large secret wire transfers to an offshore account. The account belonged to a known fixer in the corporate underworld, a man who specialized in accidents and intimidation. The payments corresponded to dates near his crash and to other unexplained fatalities that had benefited their company in the past, conveniently eliminating competitors. And the final proof, the one that broke Arthur's heart into 1,000 pieces, was a cell phone record. A call made by Richard minutes after the time of the crash to that very same fixer. It was the call Lena had answered. Richard hadn't been asking if something had happened. He had been confirming if the job was done. The pain of the discovery was physical, a pressure in his chest that left him breathless. Richard, his friend, his near brother, the man with whom he had dreamed, fought, and built an empire. It was him. The greed, the envy, all of it had been hidden behind a fraternal smile and pats on the back. The facade of concern was a mask for the deepest of betrayals. Arthur looked out his office window at the city he had conquered, and he had never felt so alone. The enemy had a face, and it was the face he trusted most in the world. Despair threatened to swallow him, but then he thought of Lena, drawing on the hotel floor. He wasn't alone anymore. He had someone to protect. The pain turned to steel. The battle was no longer to save his company. It was to save his soul, and to get justice, no matter how personal and devastating the cost. The revelation about Richard was like a poison spreading through Arthur's memories, tainting every handshake, every shared laugh, every victory celebrated together. A lifelong friendship was revealed to be a meticulously constructed lie. For days, Arthur operated in a state of cold dissociation, the emotional pain so intense that his mind walled it off so he could function. He continued to go to the office, to attend meetings, to interact with Richard. Every word of concern from his partner was like a shard of glass in his ears. He had to maintain normalcy, couldn't let on that the game was up. Any false move could put Lena in even greater danger. The predator would only strike if it felt cornered. And for now, Arthur needed it to feel secure in its web of lies. His absolute priority was Eleanor's recovery and Lena's well-being. The old woman, under intensive care and the correct treatment, was beginning to show signs of improvement. The toxin was slowly being flushed from her system, but it had left her terribly weak. The doctor said it would be a long recovery. Lena spent most of her days at the hospital with her grandmother, reading stories from books Arthur bought for her. The girl displayed a maturity and strength that haunted him. She had become her grandmother's rock, just as she had, in a strange way, become Arthur's. Her presence, her simple, unwavering courage was what kept him from drowning in his own bitterness. One afternoon, as he watched Lena patiently teaching her grandmother how to hold a glass again, he realized the depth of what Richard had done. He hadn't just tried to take his life and his empire. He had attacked innocence, pure goodness, in an attempt to erase his tracks. He had turned a hero into a victim, and Arthur would not allow it. In that moment, he made a decision. It wasn't enough to expose Richard. He had to dismantle everything that allowed a man like him to thrive. Meanwhile, Richard, sensing the situation was unresolved, began to get nervous. He didn't understand why Arthur was still alive, why the girl wouldn't be quiet, and why, despite everything, business continued as usual. Arthur's survival was a dangerous loose end. The pressure started to make him careless. He made new calls to his fixer, conversations that Arthur's team was now monitoring and recording. The orders were clear. The girl needed to disappear, not violently at first, in a way that seemed official, clean, a way that would permanently discredit her. The blow came on Friday morning. Lena, who had started attending a small private school near the hotel under the discreet watch of two of Arthur's security guards, was not there to be picked up at the end of the day. The panic was immediate. The driver and guards searched the entire school, but she had vanished. Minutes later, Arthur received a call from the principal, her voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. 2 people came for her earlier, a man and a woman. They identified themselves as social workers from Child Protective Services. They had paperwork, an official-looking order. They said there had been reports concerning the girl's family situation and that they were taking her to a temporary shelter for evaluation. It all seemed so legitimate." Arthur's blood ran cold. His men, instructed not to interfere with official actions to avoid raising suspicion, had let her be taken. It was Richard's move, brilliant in its cruelty, a kidnapping disguised as bureaucracy, using the system itself to do the dirty work. Lena wasn't just missing. She was in the hands of people who answered to the man who wanted her silenced. The gratitude Arthur felt for the girl transformed into an overwhelming despair, a terror so profound it stole his breath. She was in mortal danger, not for anything she did, but because she had the courage to save his life. Guilt and fear crushed him with the force of 1,000,000 tons. He had failed to protect her, and now, every second counted in the race to find her before it was too late. Arthur Sterling's world, a universe built on the premise of absolute control, disintegrated with a single phone call. The despair that followed wasn't a cold, manageable emotion, but an overwhelming torrent that drowned him. For a moment, he was paralyzed, his hand gripping the phone so tightly the plastic groaned. The image of Lena, with her serious eyes and silent courage, being led away by strangers under the guise of the law, was torture. Then the paralysis broke, replaced by a rage so intense it cleared his mind. He was no longer a businessman. He was a force of nature in search of a child. Within minutes, he mobilized every resource at his disposal. His security team, lawyers, private investigators, all were activated. The command was simple and unequivocal. Find her. Use any means necessary. The search machine Arthur set in motion was relentless. Contacts in government agencies were called, favors cashed in, pressure applied. It quickly became clear there was no official order, no record of CPS agents assigned to Lena's case. The kidnapping had been executed with shocking audacity, exploiting people's trust in authority. While teams scoured the city, analyzing security cameras and questioning witnesses, Arthur locked himself in his makeshift command center. The city map projected on a wall, every second of waiting a needle in his soul. Guilt gnawed at him. He had brought her into his world, exposed her to his monsters, and failed to keep her safe. The silent promise he had made to himself to protect her lay in ruins. It was in the midst of this chaos, as he barked orders into the phone, that Daniel entered the room, his face darker than Arthur had ever seen it. He carried a thin file. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice low. "The investigation into Richard's past activities. We found something much worse than we imagined." Arthur tore his eyes from the map, his irritation at the interruption dissipating at the gravity of his assistant's expression. He took the file. Inside were concise reports, old news clippings, and financial analyses. Richard's name was connected to a series of accidents over the last decade. Stephen Vance, a brilliant competitor on the verge of launching a revolutionary product, had died in a car crash caused by an unexplained mechanical failure. Helen Baxter, an executive who had discovered embezzlement and threatened to expose everything, had perished in an accidental fire at her country house. There were 3 cases, all closed as fatalities, all conveniently removing obstacles from their company's path. The pattern was undeniable, systematic, and terrifying. Richard wasn't just a greedy traitor. He was a serial predator, using the facade of chance and bad luck to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. Arthur hadn't been the first victim. He was just the latest in a line of targets. The realization hit him with a profound nausea. All those times he and Richard had mourned the tragedy that had befallen a rival, the terrible bad luck. It had all been a performance. Richard had been there by his side, offering condolences for the very disasters he had orchestrated. He had built part of his empire on the graves of innocent people, and now, the same hand that had signed those sentences had closed around Lena. At that exact moment, Arthur's phone rang. It was the head of his search team. "Sir, we found something," her school backpack. Arthur's heart leapt with a mix of hope and fear. "Where?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The answer was a punch to the gut. "In a dead-end alley, down by the docks, tossed next to a dumpster, no sign of her." The mental image of the small pink backpack, a gift he had given her, discarded like trash in a filthy, forgotten place, shattered the last of his control. She wasn't in the system anymore. They had taken her somewhere the rules didn't apply, a place where a child could simply vanish forever. The discovery of Lena's school backpack was like a period at the end of a death sentence. To Arthur, that piece of pink canvas tossed in the trash represented the end of hope, the surrender of innocence to the sordid underworld Richard inhabited. He refused to let his team see, but inside, he was disintegrating. Power, money, influence, all of it proved useless in reversing the most catastrophic mistake of his life. He sat in his office, the silence of the luxurious room screaming louder than any alarm. For the first time, he had no plan, no strategy. He just had the image of a shy smile and the memory of a fragile laugh. And the pain of losing them was a physical wound. But across the city, in an abandoned warehouse that smelled of fish and salt water, hope wasn't dead. It was just scared, hungry, and thinking. Lena was locked in a small, dusty room. Her captors, the fake social workers couple, treated her with a cold indifference, giving her tasteless food and water in a plastic cup. They weren't cruel, just efficient. And that was somehow more frightening. She spent the first few hours crying softly, huddled in a corner. But after a while, fear gave way to something else. A quiet stubbornness. The same stubbornness that had made her lift a rock too heavy for her arms. She began to observe. The man who guarded her was lazy. He locked the door from the outside with a heavy padlock, but she noticed the door itself was old wood, and the hinges were rusty. She spent hours examining the small, barred window, too high to reach, but it was the floor that gave her an idea. A few floorboards near the wall seemed looser than the others. Using the metal buckle from her belt, she started to work, with the patience of a cornered animal, scraping at the rotten wood, loosening the rusty nails. It was slow, painful work for her small fingers. Late at night, when the warehouse was silent, she finally managed to pry up the edge of one of the boards. The space beneath was tight and dirty, but it led outside the room. She squeezed through the hole, her clothes tearing, her skin scraping, and emerged into the dark warehouse corridor. The fear returned with full force, but she swallowed it down. Creeping in the shadows, guided by a sliver of light from an office, she drew closer, and that's when she heard the voices. The man and woman, her captors, talking on a speakerphone, and the voice on the other end, filtered through the device, was the same calm, terrifying voice she had heard on the side of the road, the voice that belonged to Richard. "Is she still quiet?" the voice asked. "Yes, sir. Scared, but under control," the male captor replied. There was a pause. "That's not good enough anymore. The investigation is closing in. The girl and her testimony are the least of my problems now. Her whole community is a loose end. They saw Arthur's car, they saw the smoke. If the police start asking the right questions out there, I need you to clear the board, permanently. A gas leak, a fire, make it look like a tragic accident. No one will care about that place." Lena felt the air leave her lungs. Clear the board. Eleanor, her neighbors, the kids she played with. They wanted to erase everything. Erase her home, her life, everyone she knew, to hide a secret. Terror gave way to an icy clarity. She was no longer fighting just for herself. With her heart pounding like a trapped bird, she retreated into the shadows and ran. She ran as she had never run before, out of the warehouse, into the dark, unfamiliar streets of the port, a little girl carrying a terrible burden. After hours of hiding, as dawn broke, she saw a kind-faced dockworker and asked, her voice trembling, to use his phone. She only knew one number by heart, the number Arthur had made her memorize. "For emergencies," he had said, and this was the biggest one of all. The phone rang once, twice, and Arthur's voice, hoarse with exhaustion and despair, answered. "Hello? Arthur," she whispered. "It's me, Lena. I got away, but you have to listen. He's going to hurt everyone." Lena's voice, a fragile whisper across the phone line, was like a defibrillator to Arthur's stopped heart. The exhaustion and despair evaporated, replaced by a pure, cold adrenaline. She was alive, and she was fighting. He listened, absorbing every terrified word about Richard's plan to eradicate her community, and the rage inside him crystallized into a diamond of purpose. That monster would not touch another soul. As his security team mobilized to the location Lena indicated, he calmed her with a steadiness he didn't know he possessed. "Lena, you were incredibly brave. Now I need you to do one more thing. Stay hidden and don't talk to anyone until my men get there. They'll use the password Yellow Butterfly. Understand?" "I understand," she whispered back, and the call ended. Arthur had barely hung up when his personal cell rang. The name on the screen made his blood boil. Richard. He took a deep breath, forcing a mask of exhaustion and confusion into his voice. "Richard?" His partner's voice was a well of false sympathy. "Arthur, my friend, I heard what happened. The girl. It's a tragedy. I'm devastated. The police are doing nothing. I have my own contacts. I think I know who's behind this. We need to talk alone, to clear this misunderstanding up once and for all." It was the bait, the invitation to the slaughterhouse. "Where?" Arthur asked, his voice deliberately shaky. Richard gave him the address, an old, abandoned steel mill on the edge of the city. "Come alone, Arthur. For the sake of our friendship, for your safety." The trap was set, but now the prey knew exactly where he was going. Hours later, with Lena safe and under the protection of his most trusted men at a secret location, Arthur met with her and his head of security. He explained Richard's plan. It was Lena, her mind sharpened by the streets, who offered the missing piece. "Those old places are full of noise," she said, her voice low but firm. "Things stacked up. Loose metal. If you make a really loud noise in one place, everyone looks there." The simplicity of the idea was genius. The survivor's cunning and the millionaire's resources merged into a dangerous plan. Arthur would go to the meeting. His men, equipped with listening devices and night vision, would position themselves around the perimeter, and Lena, at her own insistent request, would have a crucial role. As dusk fell, Arthur drove to the steel mill. The place was a skeleton of concrete and steel, haunted by the wind that howled through broken windows. The shadows were long and menacing. Richard was waiting for him in the center of the main hangar, and he wasn't alone. Two burly men flanked him. The mask of friendship had dropped, revealing a face twisted by greed and hatred. "You just don't die, do you, Arthur?" He spat the words. "Always lucky. First the crash, then the girl, a pest that refuses to be eradicated." He motioned to his men, "But all luck runs out." As the henchman advanced, Arthur kept his eyes locked on Richard, his heart hammering, but his face a mask of defiance. He was buying time, waiting for the signal. On a high metal catwalk, deep in the shadows above them, a small figure moved. Lena, guided by one of Arthur's men, had reached her position. She looked down at the man who had become like a father to her. Surrounded by enemies, fear paralyzed her for a second. She could run, save herself. But then she saw Arthur's gaze, a look of trust in her. It was the same look he must have had when he was trapped in the burning car, waiting for a miracle. She was his miracle, then and now. With a silent cry of determination, she pushed with all her might at a pile of rusted metal pipes that were precariously balanced on the edge of the catwalk. The crash of metal on concrete was deafening, an artificial thunder that echoed through the hangar, causing everyone, including Richard and his men, to instinctively turn toward the sound. It was the diversion, the signal, and in the exact moment, Richard's eyes shifted. Arthur lunged forward. In the chaotic instant created by the crash, the world seemed to move in slow motion. Richard's goons, momentarily stunned, hesitated. It was all Arthur needed. Years of discipline and the adrenaline of desperation guided his movements. He didn't attack Richard, but seized him. using his former friend's body as a human shield as he retreated to the cover of a large concrete pillar. "Don't move!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the vast industrial space. The surprise and sudden reversal of roles froze the two men, who looked to Richard for orders. Richard, caught in Arthur's iron grip, gasped, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You idiot! Get him!" he hissed, but his men didn't dare risk a shot. It was in this tense standoff that the lights came on. Blinding beams from tactical flashlights flooded the hangar from every direction. From the shadows, silent, dark figures emerged, Arthur's security team moving with the precision of a military unit, disarming the stunned henchmen before they could react, and with them, the police. Not the skeptical detectives from the beginning, but a special task force, alerted by Arthur's team with irrefutable proof. Recordings, financial transactions, and most importantly, a testimony that was about to be given. Richard looked around, his face paling as he realized the game was over. The trap he had set had closed on him. As Richard was handcuffed, his eyes locked on Arthur's with a hatred that promised a lifetime of resentment. Arthur only had eyes for the catwalk above. Lena stood there, looking down, her face smudged and her eyes wide, held in the arms of one of her protectors. He nodded to her, a small gesture that conveyed a universe of gratitude and relief. She had done it again. She had saved him. The brave girl who used a rock to break a seatbelt had now used a pile of pipes to break a conspiracy. The emotional parallel of that moment hit him hard. A powerful echo of the rescue on the burning highway. In the days and weeks that followed, the truth came out with the force of an avalanche. Richard's confession, in exchange for a lesser sentence, not only solved the attempt on Arthur's life, but also reopened the cold cases of past accidents. Families who had lost loved ones to bad luck finally had justice. Richard's story wasn't just about personal betrayal, it was about a system that allowed corporate predators to operate with impunity. The most shocking revelation, however, was the extent of the network of accomplices. It turned out Richard hadn't acted alone. There was a web of investors and fixers who profited from the elimination of owners and competitors. Arthur's investigation started to save his own life, ended up exposing a cancer that had spread throughout the business world. For Arthur, the victory in court was secondary. His real battle was rebuilding a life from the ashes of betrayal. The empire he'd built with Richard now felt tainted, contaminated. But amid this desolation, something new and infinitely more valuable was growing. He spent his days at the hospital with Eleanor, who was recovering slowly, and with Lena, who now smiled more often. He discovered a simple pleasure in reading stories to them, in hearing about Lena's day at school, in just being present. He began the legal process of becoming Lena's legal guardian, a decision that felt like the most natural and right thing he had ever done in his life. He wasn't just offering them a home, he was asking to be part of their family, seeking a safe harbor for his own shipwrecked soul. The girl society had deemed insignificant, and the millionaire who considered himself self-sufficient had found in each other the missing piece to become whole. 5 weeks had passed since that sweltering Thursday afternoon, 5 weeks that felt like a lifetime. Arthur Sterling now measured time not in fiscal quarters, but in milestones of recovery. The day Eleanor could walk the hospital corridor unassisted, the day Lena lost her first baby tooth and put it under her pillow with solemn expectation, the day the adoption papers were finalized, turning a legal guardian into a father. His mansion, once a silent mausoleum to his solitude, now echoed with a girl's laughter and the quiet conversations with a wise grandmother. The void had been filled, not with possessions, but with presence. The company, now purged of Richard's and his network's influence, was being restructured. Arthur was rebuilding it on a new foundation, based not just on profit but on ethics and responsibility. He sold his collection of sports cars and used the funds to create a foundation in the names of all of Richard's victims. offering legal and financial support to families affected by corporate crime. Justice, or, he had learned, wasn't just about punishing the guilty, but also about healing the wounded. On a sunny Sunday morning, he, Lena, and Eleanor, now strong enough for outings, returned to that deserted highway. The crash site was no longer a scar of burnt metal and broken glass. Arthur had had it all cleared and, in its place, had planted a small grove of aspen trees. In the center, there was a simple wooden bench. They sat, the silence between them comfortable. What had once been a place of terror and near death was now a symbol of rebirth. It was the place where two lost souls, a man who had everything and nothing, and a girl who had nothing but possessed everything that mattered, had found each other. Lena hopped off the bench and ran to the side of the road, returning with something in her hand. It was a sharp-edged quartzite rock, much like the one she had used to free him. She handed it to Arthur. He held it, feeling its weight and solidity in his palm. It was a simple, common object, but in the right hands, at the right time, it had become the key that broke the chains of injustice. "I think we should take this one home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To remember." Back at their new home, Arthur placed the rock in the garden among the roses. It was a silent memorial, a symbol that simple tools like courage and kindness can break the strongest prisons. He finally understood that true power didn't lie in the control he exerted over his empire, but in the vulnerability of accepting help and the strength required to protect those who had first protected him. Lena, in turn, discovered that her bravery had not only saved a life, but had unmasked a network of predators, and in the process had given her the stable, loving family she had always dreamed of. The road, where nearly everything was lost, now hosted the first of many community centers funded by Arthur's new foundation, a safe place for vulnerable children. Places of trauma, he now knew, could be transformed into beacons of hope. Looking at Lena, who was now laughing as she chased a yellow butterfly in the garden, Arthur felt a peace that no business deal had ever given him. Sometimes, guardian angels don't come with wings and harps. Sometimes, they come with scraped knees, a brave heart, and a rock in their hand, ready to break the world just to set you free.